Well, good day, everybody. This is Lori Stevens talking to you from Laws Communications. We're so glad you're here. Welcome to the first of 10 LESM master classes that we'll be running all week. I hope you'll be with us all week. If you can't make one of them, don't worry about it. We're going to send links. So let me tell you a little bit about Scope Now. Scope Now is our sponsor for the SMILE conference, which is coming up June 14th next year. We are full speed ahead. We are assuming that the world will be open. Of course, a lot depends on the election, but we are operating as though it's a go for now, okay? And so that information is up on the website. So here's about Scope Now. So Scope Now works with law enforcement and SIU intelligence personnel across the globe, helping them to aggregate, centralize, and automate. Scope Now leverages open source social media and web data to help find and archive online personas, flag and highlight actionable behaviors, and uncover hidden links between multiple parties. This is all done completely anonymously. Compared to other investigative solutions, Scope Now provides entire data sets, not just links and references to your subject. So it's a very, very cool platform. I've known about it for several years now. I hope you guys will check it out, and I hope you guys will be here on Friday for their presentation. And of course, they'll have a really huge presence at the SMILE conference. So at this point, I would like to introduce our speaker for this morning. She is Amanda Coleman. Now, Amanda is the Director of Crisis Communications Consultancy, Amanda Coleman Communication Limited, based in the United Kingdom. She has 20 years of experience in emergency services communications and leading law enforcement communication at a time of crisis. In 2017, Amanda led the law enforcement communication response to deal with the Manchester Arena terrorist attack.
Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. A very rainy UK afternoon, I'm afraid. So I'm really pleased to be here with you today to talk a little bit from my own experience, but also to focus very much on being crisis ready. And people will say, well, yeah, we have been, we've gone through one of the biggest crises we've ever seen anywhere. So of course we're ready for it. But I think when you dig a bit deeper, we had plans, the start of this year, people would have had a crisis communication plan. They probably had crisis plans that existed in the organization, possibly business continuity plans. Did they actually really have things that were ready to use? And, did they actually use them when it came to it? So I'm going to look a little bit about what we can do now to get ready. And this is ready for the next phase of the pandemic. This is ready for everything else that's likely to occur, because we know that crises don't ever just come neatly one after the other. Okay, so Laurie's given a little bit about me. I changed from 20 plus years in policing because I wanted to do a bit more in working with other organisations, and I do a lot now in different parts of the world, really, which is really interesting. And although we're all very different, we're all very similar, and I think we've had a very really shared experience over the last 7-8 months. Certainly 2020 has brought us all together in one shared problem that we're all facing. So that's me. That's what I do now. One of the turning points for me, and I'll mention it a few times as I talk for the next hour or so. The big turning point for me probably was 22nd of May 2017. As Laurie said, I led the police response, communications response to the Arena terror attack, and it was the aftermath of that. It was the learning from that was what made me want to write the book. Obviously the book doesn't focus on that because there was a live investigation at that time I was writing it, but the key elements, the key learning points, the things that I thought, I need to tell people what we experienced, because although it's an extreme situation, the learning will fit for everything. Operational crisis, reputational crisis, it doesn't matter. The same learning can really help you through, and that's so that's what I wanted to do. I do often go, as you would do, I've written a book. So if you do want to get a copy of the book, there is a discount, and I thought I'd give myself a reminder because I'm rubbish for selling it, and I never tell people. But my publisher's a Cogan page, coganpage.com, and if you do go on there and want to get a copy, then they'll give a 20% discount if you type in that code, and I'll mention it again at the end because I'm a bit rubbish for promoting it. So I'll just I'll give you a little reminder anyway. I have to say, and I kind of excuse it, it's not an academic book. There's some great academic crisis communication books out there. This was never written in that. This was written from a practical standpoint. This is practical advice. And that's very much what I always talk about. I am not an academic. And what I talk about really is things that I've learned through my own experiences, and try and share that in a really practical, simple way. So the book has things like checklists and tips and stuff like that in it, as well as a number of case studies that I kind of use as well in each of the chapters. Anyway, I suppose the first thing is about recognizing a risk, and this is the starting point. Because we look at a risk, if we're going to look at risk, then we need to make sure that we're also going to have a robust framework across the organisation. Organisations should have it. I worked 20+ years in policing. It was all about managing risk. And if you're in that sort of environment, you just get used to it being second nature to some of the things that actually, when you try and then talk to other people, other businesses, as I do now, they don't see it. They don't have the same approach. So there's some really key learning, I think, around how if you're in a high pressure, high stress, high risk environment, how you manage that. And the key is, having robust processes in the organization, and that communication is a central part of it. We've seen with COVID, we've seen over the last few months how important really effective communication is. And it's not like a nice to have. It's not about public relations. It's not about PR. It's not about, likes on social media. What this is fundamentally frontline, trying to helping to get people through such a terrible circumstance that we're facing, but also whatever it is, whatever crisis it is, get through that horrible position, save lives, protect businesses. It's all these things, and that's what really effective crisis communication is about. So it has to sit right at the centre of the response, but more than that, it has to sit right at the centre of the risk management. And I talk a lot to communicators about this because it's not something that naturally they get involved in or would get involved in. So I'd start by asking questions like, do you have a copy of your organisation's risk register? Do you understand what the top risks are that have been identified? It's just a different mindset sometimes for a lot of people, but it's important. And a colleague of mine who does a similar work said, he says that every crisis is actually you can prepare for, apart from perhaps alien invasion at this moment in time. But you basically can prepare for everything. And if you do this crisis work, this risk work, should I say, you'll end up in a position where it's you're more resilient. You've got things in place, and it's easier to manage what comes next. And I've seen it at the sticky end because, we did a lot of this ahead of the Manchester Arena attack. We had done terrorist exercises. We had done a lot of work around the crisis response, what the crisis communication would look like. And yet, if you ask me, could we have prepared more? Could we have done more? Then the answer would be absolutely yes. It's easy to underestimate how much you can benefit from the time you put in before anything happens. And you can't learn these things when you're in the middle of a crisis. We know that it's just too busy. But communication, really important for the discussion, because we pick up potentially in a business the operational issues, the operational risks. But from a communication PR perspective, you can see the reputational risks. And that's an important element that needs to be brought into the discussion. As I said, it all builds resilience, increasing the conversation, the discussion, and making sure people really kind of bought into what they may need to do when things happen, because they'll understand the starting point of it. This is absolutely for me more than just having a tick in a box. You know this. Have you got a plan? Have you got a business continuity plan? Whatever it is. Those are tick box. Yes, we may have. That's not what matters. What matters is really ingraining this sort of work into the heart of the organization. So understanding risk simply, well, risk, I mean, it can come from anywhere, what it does is it threatens the operation of the business, it threatens the operation of the organization. And so, it can be and increasingly can be an impact on the confidence of the business. And we've seen this in some crises. Certainly in the UK at the minute, you've got the COVID crisis, you've got the pandemic that we're dealing with, but also there's a crisis in the confidence of the leadership of the government's response. So there's a kind of two crises that are happening at the same time. One is very much an operational pandemic response crisis, and the other is very much around the reputation and and confidence within leadership of a business, of an organization at a time of crisis is the most fundamental thing, because if you lose trust and confidence, it's a long road back, and it's time you haven't got really that you have to invest in getting back to square one and working to build that again. What we can do though is, obviously with a risk, we can have appropriate mitigation, put action in place, and have and raise awareness if we need to. I'm not in a position where, at the end of the day, we cannot make everything that's troublesome, difficult, problematic, traumatic, whatever, go away. We can't do that, no matter who we are or what business or organisation we're working for. What we can do, though, is try to manage some of that, trying to mitigate against some of those issues ever becoming a crisis. But then when they do, be ready to respond and be ready to step in and help people through it. The worst case is, as I say in the slide, the worst case is the risk becomes a crisis. And despite the best efforts of everybody, that can still happen. So what could go wrong? So much really. For a business, you look at the risk register, you look at what's in there. For comms, this is the reputational. And one of the things I have always done, previous roles, was had what I call a potential critical incidents list. So you kind of work it right back. So even before things would potentially go towards the risk register, would be on that risk sort of matrix, and before ever you were towards crisis territory, you would list what are the problems that could happen, what are the issues that could occur. And when you're sat, like as I was, in charge of a communications department of the police, you can see a lot of things. So we have had occasions where you can make those connections. I mean, interested to hear about the technology that Laurie was talking about at the start of this, because they're making the connections between different pieces of information was actually something we did. We had done on a number of occasions. So things that would be on the risk register included our potential critical incidents was one occasion where we had a number of road deaths, and it happened every weekend for over sort of 3 or 4 weekends, and they were quite high numbers for what we've been used to. And it's almost like nobody really had noticed the connection. But we had, because obviously we were asked lots of questions by the media, we'd be asked questions on social media. So we were aware of them, but you couldn't treat them all in isolation. They were all very different. There was no common thread between them. So we spoke to the traffic department, who were like, yeah, we've noticed the same thing, but we just can't get anybody to kind of help us make the connection, start to work out what we need to do. So then we could, and we started to do that. So this is why I say, getting this ingrained into your mindset and into your business is so important, because you can start to pick these things up before they ever really become a significant issue. You've got to understand the risks, understand what is likely to hit you. Look at, products and services, look at people issues, HR issues. So important, so likely to potentially be a risk. Looking at customer relations, customer issues, will have seen I'm assuming some people will have seen the Joe Malone perfume issue that was raised. Things like that where somebody else's crisis becomes yours. If anybody, I won't go into the loads of detail about it, but I do a monthly crisis case study. So if you want, it was I think that it was the last one at the start of October. So you'll find it on my social media. But what that showed was, Joe Malone had sold the perfume brand to Estee Lauder. They become embroiled in a reputational issue. She's then the name all over it, even though she no longer was associated with the brand, but it has her name. So you can so easily get caught up in other people's risks as well. We saw it with the terrorist attack in London, where one of the attacks at London Bridge, they'd hired a van. So then the company that had hired the van to these guys suddenly become right in the middle of what is a massive story, a massive issue, a massive crisis. So it's so easy that you can get caught up in other things as well. That's why when we're starting to talk risk, this is about conversations about it, talking across the business about it, looking across the environment, looking at the landscape of what's out there. So critical to be as open-minded about what risks could exist as possible when you're starting to look at this. The principles for me around risk management, and again, I'm not an academic, so these are based on my experience, not on an academic list. The first is integrity. So we need to understand what things mean and be prepared to speak about it. So if there's a risk that your business is holding, one of the ways to mitigate it may be raising awareness. If we'd had lots of conversations, certainly I'm talking about the UK here. If we had conversations about the impact a pandemic could have had and what people could do to be more resilient, what people could do to prepare, we'd be in a slightly better position than we potentially are. But, we'd ignored bird flu, we'd ignored swine flu, and other countries hadn't. So when we get to what happened at the start of the year, there's almost been a collective, that we go with the expectation that this is like a film, it's like a movie. We're going through a shop and it'll suddenly be over because people just don't understand. So you've got to have some integrity and particular leadership. You've got to have a leader who is able to and keen to, has good oversight, not just a passing oversight. Yeah, that's Bill and that's Mary, they deal with the risk register, but actually really understands what's in it and then leads from the top. So makes the management of crisis issues, of risk issues, a top priority, and does put the time aside so that people can prepare. And being prepared is fundamental. And I say this a lot. There's a few things I say a lot. Remembering the people who are affected by things is one of my big issues, but also prepare. It's just so important. And when time's pressing, when we're all juggling millions of things and we've got so much to do, it steps off the list and it moves down the list, and we need to bring it back up there. We need to raise it back up because, as I said before, I would wanted to be more prepared for every crisis I think I've faced, even when some of them we've had perhaps a week to realise what was going to happen. We could still be more prepared. You need a framework, a clear structure and processes. And if you're working in a very sort of structured organisation, you'll probably be in a good position with this. But like I've said before, things like the gold, silver, bronze from a police side, the way that people come together, the exercising that goes on, the risk management that goes on, that all really is exactly what you would want to see. There's massive learnings in that, and I cover it in the book. Two elements really that I think all businesses can benefit from, not necessarily on a day-to-day basis, but having that ability to switch into a very structured response mode when a crisis happens. And I talk about the police response and emergency service response, and also then the military, because actually some of the structures really we need to try and replicate across whatever organisation we work in. But we also need a culture that looks at risk management, that looks at accountability, that it isn't, in a blame, but it's in a learning environment that's open, where people are allowed to challenge. If not, we're going to have hidden risks. We're going to be, pushing things under the carpet because we don't actually want to face them, or because it's a problem if we raise them, because it'll be ignored, because, we'll suffer some kind of, uh, you know, pressure back if we raise those up. So it does require that open approach. I've done a few debriefs in recent weeks about the initial responses to the pandemic, and one of the things I keep stressing, because people often get very nervous about it, it's not about apportioning blame. It's not about saying, somebody did well, somebody didn't do so well. It's about learning. That's the fundamental thing with this, because you can't progress, you can't develop if you're not going to learn from the experiences of yourself and of others. And we need to reward. So we need to look at the behavior that we want people to have. And this is right from the top, so that we can change that behavior. If you've got a culture that's not working, that is, trying to distance itself from risks, then you need to change that and do that in a positive way, and show people doing the right things. Okay. So 5 stages. And again, this is my simple way I always approach it. Understanding the business context. So, understand what's around there, understand what's in the risk registers, understand what the organisation's got in the business planning cycles and processes, and then identify those risks. Look at what is the most likely to hit you and what will have the most impact. And I say that this should be done, for me, from a PR and comms perspective. So you're not just doing it from a business perspective, but you're looking at it with a slightly different lens. And being able to do this will help you, because what you're looking at are the things that are going to impact the most on trust and confidence, that are going to have the most media impact, they're going to have the most social media impact. So you can perhaps see it from customers' perspective. And I think I'm doing another of these sessions tomorrow, where I'll look a bit more at the later stages of dealing with the crisis and things. And one of the things I'll say a lot tomorrow is you need to look at what's happening from the outside in. You need to look at the crisis from the outside in, and not be too focused on what the organisation or the business wants. And it's the same with risk. As a communicator, you can see what the customer's thinking, you can see what the service users are thinking, and you need to use all that data and information, because it's really valuable insight that really nobody else in the business is going to have. Nobody else in the organisation is going to have access to what you will, should have and will have at your fingertips. So use all that to evaluate the risks for you from your PR and comms head perspective, and then you'll be able to establish what are the top risks, what are the most likely to happen. And we've had occasions, like I said, with my potential critical incidents list and with my risk list, where, you can then put in place mitigation. You can start looking at the opportunities to go front and centre, go back to the integrity, you go front and centre and say, we had some issues with gun crime. We're going to talk about it. We're going to go on the front foot. We're going to get to the media. We're going to talk about what's going on. We're going to show people what we're doing. You can start then to do some of that mitigation, but you have to do this work before, because you really understand what the position is. So that's the evaluation. Really simple. That's the best way for me. Keep it really simple. So you evaluate and discuss it as widely as possible. Don't just try and do this from a one person perspective. Rate each risk. Hopefully you'll have a great big long list, and what you need to do is go through them systematically, so that you can score from 1 to 5, likely to unlikely. Unlikely to, like you should say, so 1 would be your lowest and 5 would be highest, and on likelihood and on impact. So you end up then with your top ones. The final rating then allows you to plot it. You plot it out on a graph, you get your top risks. And the key for me, and again, in doing this, is your prioritization. You're putting your effort where it matters most. So what is most likely to happen? What's going to have the most impact on the business? What's the moment that's likely to affect the trust and confidence the most? And then you can focus your efforts on that. You're not forgetting all the rest of the things that you've talked about, because they're still there. They're still plotted out. It's still, you can go back and look at it again, and consider whether that's still the case. But what you're doing is making sure that you put maximum focus on than most likely. For me, you look at it now, cyber attacks of different forms are absolutely everybody's most likely. If it's not on your top 5, then I would ask why, unless you don't have any computers and you don't use any computers. We've seen with the pandemic, there's some research that came out from the UK's National Cyber Security Centre that says, there's an increase and the likelihood of a big disruptive attack on the UK, I think it was particularly, but this will be on any country, is significant. We've already seen during the pandemic, the EU, one of the European Union structures, I think it was council possibly, had an attack. We've seen it on other businesses as well. This is what I mean about really understand and then focus your efforts on that, because this is where, and I'll mention this as before we finish, this is where resilience comes from. Resilience for individuals, but also this is resilience as an organisation, because you've put this effort in and you know that you're focusing on the right things and developing the systems to support that. So the risk management, when we talk about risk management framework, and I'm talking from a PR comms perspective, it's about using things on a day-to-day basis that will help you to identify emerging issues, spot things early, keep lists of possible, like we say, that potential incidents, ensure the risk management's on your agenda. Again, this comes from the very structured emergency services approach, but every day somebody should have an understanding in a leadership position of a comms team. What are the risks? What are the issues? What are the brewing problems? It's only by doing all that you've got an accountability and you've got the ability then to take action. And that's the key bit with all this, because taking action is what we absolutely have to get to. That's the daily tasking. What can we do today that will help for tomorrow? And it's a slightly different mindset, particularly when people have been very, very pressured and trying to just deal with today's things today. Actually, we need to start to move to think about how do we deal with what's going to come tomorrow as well. Assess risks and the mitigation you may have put in on a weekly basis. So you've got a kind of daily oversight, but then you've got a weekly, and I would say, monthly risk review. So get back to that chart and the likelihood and the impact, and is that still right? Because the world's a very changeable place, more now than at any point. Things change so fast, and you could find very easily that something rockets up into your high risk category within a matter of a few weeks or even a few days. So keeping a weather eye on it. That's not that everybody needs to sit the whole day worrying about risks. Don't get me wrong, that's not what I'm saying. It's just building that into your day to day. It's just building it as part of the day to day, in the same way that lots of other things, are part of the day to day work. It builds staff awareness, and this is where we get to plans and processes and everything are fine, but actually, if they're not rooted in people understanding them, whether that's as employees, comm staff, rest of the business, or the wider community, then it's actually not going to benefit you when it comes to you need to use it. Longer term, though, you've got things like being involved very much in the business risk framework. I would advocate for communications PR people to be heavily involved in that, creating comms risk plan. So you actually take some of that work a bit further and start to get a full annual sort of plan that you sit alongside your crisis comms strategy. You sit alongside your communications activity plan and strategies for the year. You train staff. Again, comm staff need to be continually trained. People join organisations, they leave organisations. We need to make sure when they come in that they're getting this understanding. Because if you think now, people who potentially would join your organisation won't have had the lived experience that you've had in your roles during the pandemic. So you've got to be able to try and bring them up to speed, make sure that they understand what the approach is, what the organisation's about, what the risk management looks like, what the crisis plans look like. Full annual risk review, as I said, you could definitely would advocate to do that. and evaluating the impact of activity. And that's got to be set alongside this, because you've got to know whether, if you're doing mitigation, it's actually working, or do you need to refocus. Scenario planning sits alongside the training, but if you've got your top 5 risks, then you can make certainty from uncertainty by looking at scenario planning and looking at, if we've got, say, we're picking on cyber, if you've got cyber up there, what are the potential things we're likely to face? What are our weaknesses in the organisation? What are the potential issues we could face? And what would we do from a comms perspective? What would we do? So that's where you can start to get your key messages and your narrative and things prepared that you can not use, without adjusting for the circumstances of the crisis, but you've got something as a starting point, and that helps. It helps when you're under that pressure to move really, really quickly when the crisis happens. And all this has to be linked to the crisis strategies and plans. To do all this, you have your strategy and plan, operational and reputational, 2 things sitting alongside, the stuff that goes online, the trolls, the comments, the potential issues that emerge from disgruntled people online are all reputational risks, and all need to have clear monitoring, clear understanding, clear links to how you will approach them. In the same way that whatever your operational elements are, floods, fires, whatever, manufacturing breakdown, whatever it is, the 2 need to be fully in your comms strategy, need to be in your plan. You need to know how you're going to deal with it. More than this, and I won't I want to leave some time for questions, so I won't go too heavy on it, but it's about testing and exercising. Test the plan, look at the plan, get somebody else to look at the plan. Does that seem right? Does that seem as though it'll work? Do it alone, do it within the business, do it within your 4 walls where possible. And I absolutely would say this is a vital one: involve partners. Before the Manchester Arena terror attack, we did have a plan, and the plan was heavily focused on a marauding firearms related terrorist attack, not a bomb, not a bomb being in a suicide bomber. So there were problems because there were some narrow focuses on the activity which didn't work, didn't play out because the circumstances we'd faced. But more than that, one positive that we had from it is because the plan had been developed, because there was a communications activity, a communication strategy that was in place, and it was something that had been discussed with other agencies, with other emergency services, with the health service in the region, at one of our monthly meetings, because we used to have regular monthly meetings with all the public services. We discussed this. So when the kind of unbelievable events happened, they actually knew what the plan was. So yeah, the plan may needed tweaking, it may have needed a bit of extra focus in different places, but they knew what it was. They knew what the police response was going to be. They knew what the communication response was going to be, what we were going to be doing, that we put information out on their Twitter first, that, then we would move into trying to get as much information out to have somebody of a senior rank on camera. All of these things were really important. So try where possible to bring other people that you're potentially going to be working with or you'll need to work with into your planning cycle, into discussion about risks, and then obviously looking at exercises. Because there's nothing better, even if it's just a tabletop, to sit and have a scenario, work through, people throwing different elements into you. It tests your decision making, it tests your understanding of the planning, of what work, of the focus you've got from your strategies and activity, and it also gives you really, really valuable learning. And that's the bit I think I would have hoped we had in place. As it was, we were prepared to do a bit of a work through with the media, which we'd arranged before everything happened at the Manchester Arena. And in the end, we used the date that we put it aside as a debrief with the media as to how we responded to the attack and worked with them. So try and think it through now. I say this, from bitter experience. Okay. Key bit as for me, learning from others And that's why hopefully you're on here today, and you'll be involved in things during the week, and anything really. I just try and learn tips, hints from other people. I do case studies on a monthly basis, as I've said, and I've put a couple there because I want people to try and see a bit clearer now what they can do, how they can move forward. There's a lot of concern about the uncertainty that exists in the world at the moment, and how do communicators find some certainty through it. And for me, it's from an understanding of risk and of crisis. It's from preparing. It's from having structures in place that will support you. Practices and run throughs. We said crisis comms drill. I have this thing in my head that's almost like the fire drill where you check everybody knows how to get out of the building. That was when people used to work all together in offices, obviously. But you have this understanding of what are those initial things we need to do, and we need to do that for a crisis, really. What are the initial things we need to do if a crisis hits this business, it hits this organization? Right, we need to do these things. That's why I'm so keen on checklists. I'm a bit of a checklist fan, hence why I put them in the book. But we can test people that we can, make sure that they understand. Because if we don't do that, then when something does happen, we're not, we're just going to have to hope that they've read it and hope that they understand it, rather than have actually stepped through it on a few occasions. Testing and exercising, as I've said before. And then there's the bit which is around debriefing activities the whole time. And we should be doing that. If we've been involved in any part of the coronavirus, the COVID-19 response, I would have hoped people would have done, communicators, this is, would have done debriefs on a regular basis. Really, in the start of it, you'd want to be doing something to review what had happened each day, if it's moving that quite quickly. And then you want to move to weekly and then potentially monthly. What we've ended up with is people have not done any of that. So we're now 6 months in, and some of the debriefs I've been involved in, you're 6 months in and you're going, do you remember the decision making you had at the start? Do you remember why you did these things? Do you remember what things you did? And because there's quite a distance between when they made those decisions and when the debrief happens, they've lost some of the clarity. Alongside that is the logging of activities and decisions and what happens. And that's another fundamental for me. Log all the way through a crisis, what decisions you're making and why you're making them, because that helps as well in terms of the debrief. And tomorrow I'll talk a bit more about how you can use all that information as well to inform the strategy, to develop the strategy, but also through and help you in the recovery element, because that's a fundamental, because the crisis doesn't just end when things seem to calm down. It will carry on. And some crises are so vast, a bit like what we're going through, that they'll be with us all the time. I've said that, the arena will always be with me. It was, at one point I was like, oh, I just want things to go back to normal, this to be over. But there isn't. It's like there's no return to the normal. We have a different state of affairs, and we need to live with what we've experienced. So, but we'll talk a little bit more tomorrow about that. Key in all this, and we were all seeing the importance of resilience, is that by doing risk work, by doing plans, we can make the unexpected expected. We can build certainty from the uncertainty, because it gives people something secure that they can look every opportunity to make a big impact so that those don't erupt into crises. Preparedness, you've got to look at preparing, making sure you're ready, making sure you're able to respond. All this builds confidence. And we said, I think that's the most fundamental thing, is building confidence. And communication, for me, absolutely should and can lead the way in this. Okay. we've got about 20 minutes, so I'm going to try and wrap the last couple of bits up and then give about 15 minutes, 10, 15 minutes for questions if people have got them. This is about a crisis mindset. It's like a crisis risk mindset. So it's about changing your thought processes. It's not saying that PR and comms people aren't creative, can't be creative, and shouldn't be creative. They absolutely should be. But what we need them to also be is ready, because crisis communication is not anymore going to be the add-on. It's not something that you just do if you need to because something happens, and it'll be the once in a kind of lifetime situation. There's lots of fallout, lots of issues that are going to happen post the pandemic, that are going to make this something that we need to live with in the next few years, certainly. So prepare. I've said that a few times. You absolutely use this time to prepare. Create that risk framework. Be alert to the changes in environment, the changes in mood and tone, the changes in information that's coming in, the changes in what other businesses are focusing on, the changes in, looking at the latest information, academic studies, things that come out of cybersecurity centres, national government. Look at all of those things, because they will all help you to be ready for things that you may have to face. And look at what you have access to, most importantly, as a communications person, as somebody working in PR or dealing with social media, whatever it is. Use your insight and use your data, because that's important. Nobody else will have access to that in the same way you do. So it's important, it's like jigsaw piece to get the whole picture for the organisation. Do have a crisis comms strategy, absolutely fundamental. I'll talk more about this tomorrow, but find something that works. Make sure that you've got some clear elements in that scenario plan. Think through now, what are the top things you're likely to face, and then what might happen with them. How might it affect the business? What might it mean? Yes, it's hypothetical. Yes, you might think, I've got enough of the actual business to be worried about today, but it is all helping you to move forward. Trust me, it will all help you to move forward if you've thought through what those issues may be and what the scenario might look like. Test things and learn from things. And above all, really, it's about being ready. We can all be much more ready, much more resilient, much more prepared. I said that right the way through, as every single thing that I faced could have been more prepared for. It's putting not even a massive amount of time, putting a bit of amount of time, a bit of thought into it, and making that sort of plan for the business. So that was me in a starting in a bit of a fast move through risk. I remind you about this because I know I'll forget, and I knew I'd forget. So if you wanted to learn a bit more, there's more in the book. There's more about structures around what we can learn from the military, what we can learn from emergency services, how to look at risk management, how to look at a risk matrix. And it goes into a lot more detail. And then if you're a crisis list kind of checklist type person, then you'll like it because it's got a few checklists in as well. So that's just a reminder. And then is any questions? So I think we've got about 15 minutes if anybody's got any questions.
Thank you, Amanda. That was amazing. You are such a pro. I hope that all of our attendees realize how fortunate they are to learn from you this morning, because and you have this air about you. It's just like, this isn't rocket science, folks. Just do this, and it's just like you're so seasoned and so professional. So thank you for being here. And as you mentioned, tomorrow at the same time, you're taking it to the next step and presenting managing the crisis and the move to recovery. So today was all about getting ready for the crisis. And it reminds me, and before I want to have a little story to tell, but I don't have a single question in my Q&A, and I see people on this call that I know, and I want to ask you guys to think about something you're dealing with right now, and go ahead in there in the Q&A section and type your question. Or raise your hand if you'd like to. If you've got a microphone and you'd like to speak with Amanda, you can raise your hand and I'll unmute you and you can talk to her. So please think of some questions, if you would please. Love your 5 stages of risk management. We're so in sync. It's basically 100%, what I teach as well. And so really good information there. And your book, I also wanted to let everybody know that that book is not just a 20-page little pamphlet. It's a lot. It's chock full of good information. It's about, I don't know, about a half-inch thick, would you say, Amanda? Well,
Should I let you into a secret? My mum started reading it,
oh yeah.
and last night she said to me, "I've only read a little bit." She said, "There's a lot of words and some sense."
Thanks, Mom. So I have a question here coming in. So what about right now with, let's see, what does this say? With COVID, what should people be doing now if they're not already? We've been dealing with COVID for months now, and if
Yeah.
the folks on the call don't have a real documented plan for dealing with the crisis, what can they do right now?
Yeah, I mean, I would simply try and put a little bit of time aside to look at what have you done to this point, what worked, what did you feel worked in what you did, and what potentially didn't. And then if you haven't got a plan that you can update, then try and get something down on paper. Try and get something that'll help you move to the next phase. Um, and it's very much as I said, it's just really simple. Is just trying to look at where are you as a business, as an organization. So what are the key issues, and then what do you know about the next phase? So is there a particular way you're going to respond to it? Is there a particular issue that you're likely to face? And the difficulty, as we're going to say, with this perhaps more than other crises that we've been through, is that everybody's had a shared experience, but everybody's experience will be slightly different. And it's the same with businesses. So I've been working with different organizations, and they can be doing exactly the same thing, but actually where they are in the crisis phase is very different because of their own circumstances. So this is why I say it's about personalizing it and really understanding where you are. But put simply, understand where have you been, what's happened, what's worked, what's the mood and tone, what's the feeling about the organization, and how can you use that data and information to start to plan the next phase. Because whatever happens, we're gonna be facing this or other elements of, or even like the economic fallout, whatever, we'll be facing it. So it's about trying to use that now to plot into 2021.
It's a darn good thing I have my phone next to me because people DM me a question on Twitter. They're like, there's a Q&A feature here, people. So maybe that's not working for them, but it has to do with the upcoming elections in the US. How can like if there's chaos, I think is what they want to know. And a lot of people are expecting it to be a little unwieldy. How can you know what's going to happen? How can you prepare for a situation where there's going to be a situation, but you don't really know what it's going to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about preparing for, you can look at what are like I say, the scenarios. So there are two outcomes potentially, really, aren't there, from the election? So you can start to use that to look at what might happen. And there's a bit of, you're never going to be able to guess everything, but I think you could probably have a reasonable assumption at where the pinch points are going to be. What if this happens, then what are the likely impacts of that? We've got a very similar issue in the UK with Brexit, because leaving the EU, and whilst there's so much uncertainty because there's still negotiations going on and we don't understand what's going to happen really with this, you can see certain elements that will need to be preparing for. So that's the key really in some of this. I think it's about having some thinking time or sitting down with a few people and going, okay, so what could happen from here? Personally, that's the bit I used to enjoy doing as well. Because you can kind of let your mind kind of run forward. There are ways you can teach yourself to do it as well. I think if you're not naturally somebody who can start to sort of see the options, there's ways you can kind of teach yourself to do that. But yeah, starting to look at, if A happens, then does B follow, or is it C, or what happens after that?
Thank you. I started to tell a story earlier and I forgot. That's how my brain is failing me these days. But I was working with a very large, very large police department about a decade ago. I actually lived in the city for a couple of months while I was working with them and harping every day on everything you said today about being ready for risks and, predicting what can go wrong and, and we were working on stuff. And then one day I walk in and one of the comms people says to me, so Lori, I won't say the name of the report, but it was a third party critique review of this large incident that they handled that they were severely criticized for. And they're like, Lori, the blah, blah, blah report comes out today. And I'm like, what? Like I wanted to say to her, you see me, right? You've heard me every day, right? We did nothing. We had nothing prepared for that.
Yeah.
But so we had to wing it and it was not fun. And so that's the last thing we want to do is wing it. So do something, and you're going to get this presentation recording. So, take a look at it again and take some notes if you like. And this is such good information and so valuable. So you pay big money for this.
I was going to say, one of the things you're saying about winging it, the key for me, in doing all this, is that you help build people's resilience, because I don't know about kind of how you are, how I'm exhausted with it. We've been living through months and months of difficult circumstances, problems, stuff on the media, stuff that we, in not being able to, because I'm in a lockdown-ish situation again here. So, you're going through some really difficult times. You need as much resilience as you can possibly have. And that's why, I keep saying about doing some of this, because it actually will help you and help, your staff and people you're working with to be a bit more resilient if you're not having to try and make it work, in that frenetic environment.
Yeah, there are people on this call that I've known since they were newbies at this and when they were really nervous. And I see them these days and they're like, yeah, I got it. I can handle this, and yeah. But if anybody were to wing it, I think you're probably one of the few people in the world who could wing it and like a pro. So, because you've just done so much in your career. So we don't have any other questions. So I'm going to say that I'm going to promote a couple of things. Amanda will be back, as we said, tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern time to take you to the next step, managing the crisis and the move to recovery. And then later today, in just over an hour, we have Eric Atstupanis, the attorney for the general counsel for the Massachusetts Chiefs of Police Association. And he is just another absolutely brilliant man. And I'm not saying that just because he's on the call right now. I say that even when he's not listening. He and I are also very much in sync with social media and the law. And of course, he knows 1,000 times more about it than I do. So please come back at 1 o'clock for Eric and Amanda. You're invited to sit in on that as well. And so until then, we'll say goodbye. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Amanda.
Thanks, Laurie. Thanks, guys.